The water roared like a hungry beast beneath the rotting wooden planks of Dawson's Crossing, spraying Harriet Andrews' tear-streaked face as she clutched the last remnants of her husband's broken wagon. April 1878 had brought relentless spring rains to Arizona territory, transforming the normally placid Salt River into a raging torrent that had claimed Samuel Andrews' life just moments before, sweeping him downstream while she watched helplessly from the riverbank. Their journey to start anew in Gila Bend, Arizona, had ended here at this treacherous crossing, leaving Harriet alone with nothing but 3 trunks of possessions and the haunting image of her husband's outstretched hand disappearing beneath the churning waters. "Samuel!" she screamed again, though she'd already been shouting for nearly an hour, her voice now barely audible above the river's thunderous flow. Her dress clung to her body, soaked through from the spray and the light rain that continued to fall. The late afternoon sky hung low and gray, casting the landscape in a mournful hue that matched her despair. Harriet sank to her knees on the muddy bank, the reality of her situation crashing over her like the merciless river. They had sold everything in Kansas to make this journey, seeking relief from the drought that had plagued their small farm for 3 consecutive years. Samuel had heard tales of Gila Bend's promising land and reasonable prices. A new beginning, he'd promised her. Now she was alone, miles from anywhere, with night approaching and no idea how to proceed. Their oxen had broken free in the chaos and disappeared into the brush, leaving her stranded on the wrong side of the river, the side away from Gila Bend. As darkness began to settle over the landscape, Harriet became aware of hoofbeats approaching from the west. Her heart leapt with both hope and fear. This was wild country, and strangers could mean salvation or danger. "Hello there!" a deep voice called out. "Anybody need help at the crossing?" Harriet stood on shaking legs, trying to make out the approaching figure through the gathering dusk. A tall man on horseback emerged from the tree line, leading a second horse behind him. "Please," she called, her voice breaking, "my husband, the river, our wagon." As the rider drew closer, she could see he wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the rain, a long duster coat, and had a rifle secured in his saddle holster. He reined his horse to a stop and quickly dismounted, his movements fluid and assured. "Name's Seth Ryder," he said, approaching her with careful steps. "I heard the crossing was dangerous with the rains. Came to see if anyone needed assistance." His eyes surveyed the scene quickly, taking in the broken wagon pieces at the river's edge and Harriet's bedraggled appearance. "My husband tried to test the crossing," she managed. "The planks gave way. He's gone." The words felt like stones in her throat. "I'm Harriet Andrews. We were headed to Gila Bend to start anew." Seth Ryder removed his hat, revealing dark hair and a weathered face that spoke of years under the harsh western sun. His eyes, though, held a gentle concern that provided Harriet her first moment of comfort since the tragedy. "I'm mighty sorry for your loss, Mrs. Andrews." He looked toward the raging river. "That water's not giving anything back today. Come morning, I can help search downstream, but now we need to get you somewhere safe for the night." "But my things..." Harriet gestured helplessly toward the 3 trunks she'd managed to drag from the wagon before it was swept away. "We'll secure what we can up in those trees," Seth said, pointing to a stand of cottonwoods on higher ground. "The rest I'll come back for. Right now, you're what matters." His efficiency in crisis calmed her somewhat. Within minutes, he had dragged her trunks to higher ground, covered them with oiled canvas from his saddlebag, and helped her onto his second horse. "This is Penny," he said as he adjusted the stirrups for her, "gentlest mare in the territory. She'll take good care of you." As they rode away from the river, Harriet couldn't help looking back at the place where her life had shattered. Samuel had been a good man, a hard-working farmer who'd never stopped believing things would improve. They'd been married just 3 years, not long enough to have children, but long enough that she couldn't imagine life without him. "There's a line shack about 2 miles from here," Seth explained as they rode. "It's not much, but it's dry and has a stove. We can rest there tonight, and I'll get you to Gila Bend tomorrow." "You're very kind, Mr. Ryder," Harriet said, her voice hollow with shock and grief. "But I don't know what I'll do once I reach town. Samuel had arrangements, contacts. I have no one. Seth glanced back at her, raindrops glistening in his dark beard. One step at a time. Mrs. Andrews, let's get you warm and dry first. The line shack was indeed modest. A single room with a small cast-iron stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot against one wall. Seth efficiently lit the stove with kindling and matches from a tin box on the shelf, then stepped outside to tend to the horses. Harriet stood dripping on the plank floor, feeling as though she existed in some terrible dream. Her mind kept returning to Samuel's face just before the current took him the look of surprise, then terror, then a desperate love as he realized what was happening. When Seth returned, he carried his saddlebags and a small bundle wrapped in canvas. I have coffee and some jerky, he said. Not much of a meal, but it'll warm you. There are some old clothes in that trunk there left by the cowhands who use this place during roundups. Not proper for a lady, but they're dry. Thank you, Harriet said mechanically, though the thought of food made her stomach turn. Seth busied himself with making coffee, giving her privacy as she found a large flannel shirt and woolen trousers in the trunk. She stepped behind a hanging blanket in the corner to change out of her sodden dress, grateful for the dry clothing despite its impropriety. When she emerged, Seth had 2 tin cups of steaming coffee on the table. He glanced up, then quickly averted his eyes from her unusual attire. The coffee will help, he said, gesturing to a chair. Drink it while it's hot. Harriet sat and wrapped her cold hands around the warm cup. Are you a rancher, Mr. Ryder? Not exactly, he replied, taking the other seat. I work for the Yellow Creek outfit about 20 miles west of here. I'm what they call a troubleshooter, handle the difficult jobs, the dangerous cattle drives, the business in town. He paused. I was heading to Gila Bend on an errand when I heard about the crossing being treacherous. Thought I might be needed. You certainly were, Harriet said softly. I'd likely have spent the night by the river otherwise. Seth studied her with interest. If you don't mind my asking, what were you and your husband planning in Gila Bend? Land, she said simply. Samuel heard there was good farmland available at fair prices. We had saved for 3 years, sold everything we couldn't carry. Her voice threatened to break again. He carried our money in a leather pouch inside his shirt. It's gone with him now. Seth's expression darkened. I'm truly sorry, Mrs. Andrews. Harriet took a sip of the strong black coffee, welcoming the bitter heat. I still can't believe he's gone. One moment we were discussing how to test the crossing. The next, she set the cup down with trembling hands. I don't know what to do now. You rest tonight, Seth said firmly. Tomorrow, we'll recover what we can of your belongings and get you to town. Gila Bend's not large, but the people are decent. Someone will help. And you? Harriet asked. You've already done so much. Seth's eyes met hers briefly. I'll see you safely settled before continuing my business. He stood and moved to the stove, his back to her. You take the cot. I'll manage fine on the floor. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Harriet that night. She lay on the narrow cot listening to the rain against the roof and Seth's steady breathing from his bedroll near the stove. In the flickering light of the banked fire, she could make out his profile strong and still, yet somehow watchful even in sleep. She wondered what kind of man so readily helped a stranger in distress. In her experience, such kindness usually came with expectations. Yet Seth Ryder had been nothing but respectful, keeping a careful distance that honored her recent loss and vulnerable position. Morning arrived with watery sunlight filtering through the single window. Harriet woke to find Seth already up, the smell of coffee once again filling the small space. River's down some, he reported, handing her a steaming cup. We should be able to recover your trunks and cross safely. I've got some hardtack here, not much of a breakfast, but it'll sustain you. Harriet accepted the simple fare gratefully. After eating, she changed back into her dress, which Seth had hung near the stove overnight. It was still damp in places, but wearable. They rode back to Dawson's Crossing in silence, the events of the previous day hanging between them like a physical presence. The river, while still swollen, had indeed receded several feet, revealing more of the damaged bridge and scattered debris from their wagon. Seth efficiently secured her trunks to the horses, one behind his saddle and two behind hers. There was no sign of Samuel's body along the visible stretches of the riverbank. "Do you want to search farther downstream?" Seth asked gently. Harriet stared at the churning water, her heart aching. "Yes," she whispered, "I need to find him if I can." They spent 2 hours following the river's course, scanning the banks and shallow eddies for any sign of Samuel. A mile downstream, they found his hat caught in some branches, but nothing else. "The current's strong," Seth finally said. "He could be miles from here by now." His voice was gentle but practical. "Mrs. Andrews, I don't mean to be unkind, but we should reach town before nightfall." Harriet nodded numbly, knowing he was right. "Could someone continue the search? I would pay." She stopped, remembering she had no money. "I'll alert the sheriff in Gila Bend," Seth promised. "They can organize a proper search party." They returned to the crossing, where Seth studied the damaged bridge with a critical eye. "We can't risk the horses on those planks," he decided. "We'll need to ford it where it's wider and shallower, about a 1/4 mile upstream." The spot Seth chose looked terrifying to Harriet, a broad expanse of rushing water that, while not as deep as at the bridge, still flowed with considerable force. "I can't," she whispered, memories of Samuel's last moments flooding her mind. Seth dismounted and approached her horse. "Mrs. Andrews." "Harriet," he said, using her given name for the first time. "I know you're frightened, and you have every reason to be. But I've crossed rivers like this hundreds of times. I know what's safe and what isn't." His steady gaze held hers. "I promise you, I will not let anything happen to you. But the horses, my things. The horses are strong swimmers and your trunks are secure. But if you truly can't bring yourself to ride across—" He paused, then said with simple determination, "Then I'll carry you across myself." Harriet stared at him in disbelief. "Carry me? Through that current? If that's what it takes to get you safely to the other side?" "Yes." There was no bravado in his voice, just quiet resolve. Something in his steady confidence calmed her racing heart. "No," she said finally. "I'll ride. Just stay close." Seth nodded approvingly. "I'll go first with my horse. Watch how we do it, then follow exactly the same path. The bottom is rocky but solid. Keep Penny moving forward. Don't let her turn sideways in the current." Harriet watched anxiously as Seth mounted and guided his horse into the water. The animal moved confidently under his direction, stepping carefully but steadily across the river. The water rose to the horse's chest at the deepest point, but they maintained their course and soon reached the opposite bank. Seth turned and called encouragement. "Just like that, Mrs. Andrews. Penny knows what to do." Taking a deep breath, Harriet nudged the mare forward. The sensation of entering the river sent panic coursing through her, but Penny moved steadily, seemingly untroubled by the rushing water. Halfway across, the current pushed more strongly against them, and Harriet gripped the saddle horn with white knuckles. "Keep going! You're doing fine!" Seth called. 3/4 across, Penny stumbled slightly on an unseen rock, and Harriet gasped in terror as the horse momentarily lost footing. The mare recovered quickly, but Harriet's nerve failed. "I can't!" she cried. In an instant, Seth was back in the water, wading toward her despite the current that reached his thighs. He reached her horse and took the reins firmly in hand. "Look at me, Harriet," he commanded. "Not at the water. Look at me." She forced her gaze from the rushing river to his face, steady, confident, concerned. "I've got you," he said more gently. "We'll finish this together." With Seth leading the horse, they completed the crossing. When they reached the bank, Harriet was trembling so violently she could barely dismount. Seth's strong hands caught her as her legs gave way. "You did it," he said, holding her upright. "You're safe now." For a moment they stood close together, his hands on her arms, her face lifted to his. Something passed between them, a current different from the river's, before Harriet stepped back, suddenly conscious of their proximity. "Thank you," she said inadequately. Seth nodded, seeming to understand all she couldn't express. "We should keep moving. Town is about 4 hours' ride from here." As they traveled, the landscape gradually changed from the river's lush surroundings to more arid terrain. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels across the rolling desert, and in the distance, rugged mountains rose against the sky. Seth pointed them out. "The Gila Mountains," he explained. "Gila Bend sits in their shadow, near where the river makes a sharp turn, hence the name." "It's beautiful," Harriet admitted, surprised to find she could notice beauty amid her grief. "Different from Kansas." "Arizona territory is a land of extremes," Seth said. "Harsh in ways that can break you, but with a beauty that can heal something inside you that you didn't know was wounded." The philosophical observation surprised her. "You sound like you love it here." "I do," he acknowledged. "Came west from Pennsylvania after the war. Couldn't settle back into city life after what I'd seen." He glanced at her. "What about you? Kansas must have been home." "It was all I knew," Harriet replied. "My parents had a small farm there. When they passed influenza 3 years ago, Samuel and I took it over. Then, the drought came." She sighed. Samuel was always optimistic, always certain things would improve. When they didn't, he decided we should seek our fortune elsewhere. "He sounds like a good man." "He was," Harriet said softly. "Kind and hard-working. We were friends before we married." Seth nodded, and they rode in companionable silence for a while. "What business brings you to Gila Bend?" Harriet eventually asked. Seth hesitated slightly. "The Yellow Creek Ranch is expanding. I'm meeting with some landowners about purchasing grazing rights." "You seem young to handle such important business." A small smile touched his lips. "I'm 32, Mrs. Andrews. Not so young. And Mr. Henderson, he owns Yellow Creek, trusts my judgment." "You must have worked for him a long time." 5 years, Seth confirmed. "Started as a regular hand, worked my way up. Mr. Henderson has no sons, just a daughter away at school back east. He's become something of a mentor to me." They stopped to rest the horses at midday, sharing the last of Seth's jerky and some dried apples he produced from his saddlebag. Sitting in the shade of a large mesquite tree, Harriet found herself studying her companion more carefully. Seth Ryder was tall and lean, with the muscular build of a man accustomed to physical labor. His face was tanned and weathered, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. He wore a neatly trimmed dark beard that couldn't quite hide a small scar along his jawline. His clothes were simple but well-maintained, a sign of self-respect rather than vanity. Most striking, though, were his eyes, a deep blue that seemed to take in everything around them with quiet assessment. They were kind eyes, Harriet thought, but also watchful, as if they'd seen enough trouble to remain vigilant. "How old are you, Mrs. Andrews?" Seth asked suddenly, breaking into her thoughts. 25, she answered, surprised by the personal question. He nodded. "Young to be facing such challenges alone." "Age has little to do with life's trials, Mr. Ryder," she replied. "My mother was widowed at 20 with a small child to raise." "True enough," he conceded. "And please call me Seth. After crossing a river together, Mr. Ryder seems overly formal." Despite herself, Harriet smiled slightly. "Then you must call me Harriet." They reached Gila Bend as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains. The town was smaller than Harriet had expected, a single main street with perhaps 24 buildings, most constructed of adobe, with wooden porches extending into the dusty street. A church steeple rose at the far end, and the sounds of piano music drifted from what was clearly a saloon. "It's not much," Seth said apologetically as they rode slowly down the main street, "but it's growing. The railroad's coming through next year that'll change everything." "It's exactly as Samuel described it," Harriet said softly. Seth guided them to a 2-story building with a sign that read, "Gila Bend Hotel and Boarding House." "Mrs. Pearson runs this place," he explained as they dismounted. "She's a good woman, fair with her rates." Before they could approach the building, A stocky man with a silver star pinned to his vest stepped out of a nearby office. "Seth Ryder," he called. "Didn't expect to see you in town for another few days." "Sheriff Wilson," Seth greeted him. "Change of plans." He briefly explained the tragedy at Dawson's Crossing and Harriet's situation. The sheriff removed his hat respectfully. "My condolences, madam. That crossing's been trouble since the rain started. Lost a freight wagon there last week, though the driver made it out alive." "Mrs. Andrews' husband wasn't so fortunate," Seth said. "We searched a mile downstream but found no sign of him except his hat. I was hoping you might organize a proper search." Sheriff Wilson nodded gravely. "I'll send some men out first thing tomorrow. Can't promise anything, though. That river's claimed its share of souls over the years." "Thank you, Sheriff," Harriet said quietly. The boarding house proved to be clean and modest, with a stern-faced but kind-eyed proprietress who clucked sympathetically upon hearing Harriet's story. "You poor dear," Mrs. Pearson said. "Of course I have a room for you. And don't worry about payment just yet. We'll sort that out once you're settled." "That's very kind," Harriet said, overwhelmed by the woman's generosity. "But I can't accept charity indefinitely. I'll need to find work." "One step at a time," Mrs. Pearson insisted. "Let me show you to your room and then perhaps a hot bath. You look like you've had quite an ordeal." Seth arranged to have Harriet's trunks brought to her room, then awkwardly stood in the boarding house parlor as she prepared to follow Mrs. Pearson upstairs. "Will you be staying in town long?" Harriet asked him, suddenly reluctant to part from the one person who connected her to Samuel's final moments. "A few days at least," Seth replied. "My business here will take some time. I'm staying at the hotel down the street." He hesitated. "Perhaps I could call on you tomorrow? See how you're settling in?" "I'd appreciate that," Harriet said sincerely. That night, in the unfamiliar comfort of a real bed, Harriet finally allowed herself to fully grieve. She wept for Samuel, for their lost dreams, for the uncertain future that stretched before her. When dawn broke, she felt hollowed out but somehow clearer, as if the tears had washed away some of the shock that had numbed her since the accident. After a simple breakfast in the boarding house dining room, Harriet ventured outside to explore the town that was to have been her new home. Gila Bend in daylight revealed itself to be a frontier community in transition, part rough mining and cattle town, part aspiring center of civilization. The main street boasted not only the expected saloon and general store, but also a small bank, a dressmaker's shop, and a schoolhouse. At the general store, Harriet inquired about work opportunities for a woman. "Not much call for lady workers in Gila Bend," the shopkeeper said, eyeing her plain dress. "Mrs. Miller at the dressmaker's might need help, or maybe the school needs an assistant. Of course, if you can cook, Mrs. Pearson might let you work for your board." Harriet thanked him and continued her explorations. As she passed the sheriff's office, Sheriff Wilson emerged and tipped his hat to her. "Mrs. Andrews," he greeted her, "I've sent 2 deputies upriver to search for your husband. No word yet, but they'll be thorough." "Thank you, Sheriff," Harriet said. "I appreciate your help." "Seth Ryder was most insistent," the sheriff replied with a slight smile. "He's not a man many people say no to around here." "Oh? Why is that?" Sheriff Wilson chuckled. "Seth's got a reputation for getting things done and standing by his word. When he says something needs doing, folks listen." He studied her face. "He told me you showed remarkable courage yesterday. Said not many women would have held together like you did after what happened." Harriet felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. "Mr. Ryder was very kind to help me. I don't know what I would have done otherwise." "Well, you couldn't have had a better man come along," the sheriff said. "If you'll excuse me, I need to make my rounds." As promised, Seth called at the boarding house that afternoon. He had changed into cleaner clothes, a white shirt with a black vest and dark trousers, and had trimmed his beard. The transformation from trail-worn cowboy to respectable businessman was striking. "You look well," he said, studying her face. "Did you rest?" "As well as could be expected," Harriet replied. "I've been exploring the town. It seems pleasant enough." They sat in the boarding house parlor, where several other residents were reading or engaged in quiet conversation. A pot of tea appeared, courtesy of Mrs. Pearson, who gave Seth an appraising look before leaving them to talk. "Have you thought about your plans?" Seth asked, adding a spoonful of sugar to his tea. Harriet sighed. "Without Samuel's contacts or our savings, my options are limited. I'll need to find work, but opportunities seem scarce." "What skills do you have?" "I can sew, cook, keep accounts," she listed. "I taught at a small school in Kansas for a year before marrying Samuel." She paused. "The shopkeeper mentioned Mrs. Miller at the dressmaker's might need help." Seth nodded. "Martha Miller is a fine woman, widowed young, built that business herself. I could introduce you if you'd like." "You know her well?" A fleeting smile crossed his face. "I know most everyone in Gila Bend. Part of my job is maintaining good relations with the townsfolk." The dressmaker's shop, when they visited it an hour later, proved to be a tidy establishment with fabric-draped windows and the gentle whirring of a sewing machine audible from within. Mrs. Miller herself was a plump, cheerful woman in her 40s with quick, clever hands and assessing eyes. "Seth Ryder," she greeted them warmly. "Don't tell me Mr. Henderson finally convinced you to get a proper suit made." "Not today, Martha," Seth laughed. "I'm here to introduce Mrs. Harriet Andrews. She's new to town and seeking employment. I thought of you immediately." Mrs. Miller turned her attention to Harriet, eyes taking in every detail of her appearance. "I heard about your trouble at the river crossing. Terrible business. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Harriet said sincerely. "Do you sew, Mrs. Andrews?" "Yes, quite well. I made most of my own clothes and did alterations for neighbors back in Kansas." Martha Miller's eyes brightened. "Can you work a singer?" "I'm familiar with them, though we couldn't afford one ourselves." "Well, that's easily remedied with practice." Mrs. Miller glanced around her shop. "Truth is, business has been increasing with all the new settlers. I've been thinking of taking on help, but haven't found anyone suitable." She studied Harriet again. "I could offer you room and board plus $2 a week to start. If you prove skilled, we can renegotiate." It was less than Harriet might have hoped for, but a start nonetheless. "When would you like me to begin?" "No time like the present," Mrs. Miller said briskly. "There's a small room behind the shop you can use, not fancy but private enough." Seth, who had been watching the exchange with satisfaction, stepped forward. "That's wonderful news, Martha. Mrs. Andrews still has her belongings at the boarding house." "I'll have my boy fetch them later," Mrs. Miller interrupted. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Seth, I'd like to see what Mrs. Andrews can do with a needle." Seth tipped his hat to both women. "I'll leave you ladies to your business then. Mrs. Andrews, I'll call on you tomorrow if I may." "Of course," Harriet replied, surprised by how much she looked forward to seeing him again. The next 2 weeks established a new rhythm to Harriet's life. She threw herself into learning the dressmaking business, grateful for the distraction from her grief. Martha Miller proved to be a demanding but fair employer, quick to correct mistakes, but equally quick to praise good work. The small room behind the shop became Harriet's new home, simple but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a lamp for evening reading. Seth called regularly, sometimes just briefly to inquire after her welfare. Other times staying longer to share news of the town or stories of his travels. He seemed to find excuses to visit the dressmaker's shop, ordering handkerchiefs he likely didn't need, or bringing buttons that Martha had apparently requested. Sheriff Wilson's men had found no trace of Samuel's body, though they'd searched several miles of riverbank. "The spring floods are unpredictable," the sheriff explained gently when he came to inform her. "Sometimes the river keeps what it takes." A small memorial service was held at the town church, attended by several townsfolk who had never met Samuel, but came out of respect for Harriet's loss. Seth stood quietly at her side throughout, his solid presence a comfort she was becoming increasingly dependent on. As April turned to May, the weather warmed, and the desert bloomed with unexpected color. Seth's business in town seemed to extend indefinitely, though he was vague about the details when Harriet inquired. "Land negotiations can be complicated," was all he would say. Mr. Henderson values thoroughness over speed. One Sunday afternoon, when the shop was closed, Seth appeared with 2 horses. "Mrs. Miller mentioned you've been working too hard," he said. "I thought you might enjoy seeing more of the countryside." The idea of riding again, of crossing open land with all its unknowns, made Harriet hesitate. But the confinement of the small shop had begun to wear on her, and Seth's hopeful expression was difficult to refuse. "I'd like that," she decided. "Let me change into something more suitable." They rode west from town, following a well-worn trail that wound through stands of mesquite and palo verde trees. The desert was alive with spring-growth brittlebush with bright yellow flowers, ocotillo with flaming red tips, and various cacti sporting pink and white blossoms. "It's beautiful," Harriet marveled. "I never imagined the desert could be so colorful." "It's brief," Seth warned. "By June, most of this will be gone until the next spring, but that makes it all the more precious." They stopped to rest in the shade of a large mesquite, spreading a blanket Seth had brought. He produced a canteen of water and a bundle containing bread, cheese, and dried fruit. "A proper picnic," Harriet smiled. "How thoughtful." Seth shrugged, seeming almost embarrassed. "I thought you might appreciate getting away from town for a while. People mean well, but their constant sympathy can become overwhelming." "You understand that?" Harriet asked, surprised. "I lost my parents young," Seth revealed, settling on the blanket across from her. "Consumption took them both within a month of each other. I was 15. The neighbors were kind, but smothering. I used to escape to the woods just to breathe without someone asking how I was feeling." "I'm sorry about your parents," Harriet said softly. "Who raised you after?" "My uncle in Philadelphia. He was a lawyer, well-intentioned but busy. Sent me to school, made sure I had what I needed. When the war came, I enlisted, much to his dismay." Seth's expression grew distant. "Served 3 years with the Union cavalry. Saw things no man should see." "Is that where you learned to handle horses so well?" He nodded. "Horses and men. War teaches you quickly who can be trusted and who can't, which situations can be managed and which can't." His blue eyes met hers. "It also teaches you to recognize courage when you see it." "You think I'm courageous?" Harriet asked incredulously. "I know you are," Seth replied simply. "You've faced devastating loss without crumbling. You've built a new life from nothing in just 2 weeks. Many would have given up." Harriet looked down at her hands. "What choice did I have? Samuel wouldn't have wanted me to surrender to despair." "There's always a choice," Seth said quietly. "The fact that you chose to keep going, that's courage." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the desert breeze rustling the mesquite leaves above them. "Tell me about Samuel," Seth said eventually. "What kind of man was he?" The question startled her. Most people avoided mentioning Samuel, as if speaking his name might cause her pain. "He was steady," she said after a moment's thought. "Not exciting or particularly ambitious, but reliable. He loved working the land, even when it disappointed him. He had wonderful hands, could fix almost anything." She smiled at a memory. "He used to carve little animals for the neighbor children, bears, horses, birds. They'd line up at our gate on Sundays to see what he'd made that week." "He sounds like a good man," Seth said. "One who brought joy to others." "He did," Harriet agreed. "What about you, Seth? Have you ever been married?" A shadow passed across his face. "No. Came close once before the war. Elizabeth was her name. But I returned changed, and she had moved on. Probably for the best." "You didn't try again?" Seth shrugged. "The right opportunity never presented itself. And my work keeps me moving. Not many women would tolerate a husband who disappears for weeks at a time." "What exactly does a troubleshooter do?" Harriet asked, seizing the opportunity to satisfy her curiosity. "Whatever Mr. Henderson needs," Seth replied. "Sometimes it's business negotiation, sometimes it's tracking rustlers, occasionally it's representing the ranch's interests in territorial disputes." He smiled slightly. I'm good with people and better with a gun, though I prefer not to use the latter. Have you ever— Harriet hesitated. Have you ever killed a man? Seth's expression grew serious. Yes, during the war, of course, but also twice since coming west. Both times it was them or me. He studied her face carefully. Does that disturb you? I suppose it should, Harriet said thoughtfully. But out here, I understand such things happen. Life seems more immediate in the West. That's a good way of putting it, Seth nodded. Everything is more immediate danger and beauty, life and death. When they returned to town late that afternoon, Seth helped Harriet dismount outside the dressmaker's shop. As her feet touched the ground, his hands lingered at her waist slightly longer than necessary, and something shifted in the air between them. Thank you for today, Harriet said, suddenly acutely aware of his proximity. It was exactly what I needed. Seth's eyes held hers. I'm glad. Perhaps we could do it again sometime. I'd like that very much. In the weeks that followed, Seth and Harriet spent increasingly more time together. They rode out to the desert on Sundays, explored the small settlements surrounding Gila Bend, and often shared simple meals at the town's modest restaurant. Seth introduced her to people he knew, helping her establish connections in her new community. Martha Miller watched their growing friendship with knowing eyes, but said nothing, though she began finding reasons for Harriet to deliver completed garments to businesses Seth frequented. Mr. Henderson's new shirt is ready, she would say with a poorly concealed smile. Perhaps you could take it to the hotel? I believe Mr. Ryder is handling the arrangements. June arrived with scorching heat that transformed the landscape. The desert blooms faded, and the town settled into a slower rhythm, with activity confined to early mornings and evenings when temperatures were more bearable. One particularly hot evening, Seth invited Harriet to join him for supper at the hotel dining room, the finest establishment in Gila Bend, though that wasn't saying much. I have news, he explained as they settled at a corner table set with actual linen napkins. My business here is finally concluding. Harriet felt a sudden chill despite the room's warmth. You're leaving Gila Bend. Seth nodded, his expression unreadable. Mr. Henderson expects me back at Yellow Creek. I've been away much longer than planned. When will you go? Harriet asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Day after tomorrow. Harriet looked down at her plate, surprised by the depth of her dismay. In just over a month, Seth Ryder had become the center of her new life, a friend, a confidant, a connection to a world beyond the dressmaker's shop. The thought of continuing without his presence left her feeling adrift. I see, she said finally. Well, I'm sure Mr. Henderson will be glad to have you back. Seth reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. Harriet, there's more I need to tell you. Something in his tone made her look up. His blue eyes were intent, searching her face as if memorizing its features. My assignment in Gila Bend was completed 3 weeks ago, he confessed. Mr. Henderson has been asking for my return since then. Harriet frowned in confusion. But you said the negotiations were ongoing. They were, but not for the ranch. Seth took a deep breath. I stayed because I couldn't bring myself to leave you. The admission hung in the air between them, startling in its simplicity and implications. I don't understand, Harriet said, though part of her did. Seth's hand fully covered hers now. I think you do. From the moment I found you by that river, something changed for me. I've never met anyone like you, Harriet, so strong yet vulnerable, so determined yet gentle. Seth, she whispered, her heart racing. It's too soon. Samuel. I know, he interrupted. Believe me, I know. I've struggled with the timing, with whether I should speak at all. But I'm leaving, and I couldn't go without telling you the truth. His grip tightened slightly. I've fallen in love with you, Harriet Andrews. I don't expect anything in return. I just needed you to know. Harriet stared at him, emotions churning within her: surprise, confusion, a strange relief, and underneath it all, a warmth she'd been trying to deny for weeks. I don't know what to say, she managed finally. You don't need to say anything, Seth assured her. I understand it's too soon, that you're still grieving. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. He hesitated. I just wanted you to know that someone cares for you, deeply. They finished their meal in a strained silence, the confession hanging between them like an invisible barrier. When Seth walked her back to the dressmaker's shop, the night air was still warm, stars brilliant overhead in the clear desert sky. At her door, he took her hand. I'll come say goodbye before I leave, if that's all right? Of course, Harriet said softly. I would be disappointed if you didn't. She lay awake that night, Seth's words echoing in her mind. Was it disloyal to Samuel to feel this pull toward another man so soon? Yet her feelings for Seth had crept up slowly. Built on shared experiences and genuine connection rather than sudden passion. Samuel had been gone only 6 weeks, but those weeks had been transformative. The woman who had arrived in Gila Bend, broken and desperate, was different from the woman she was becoming, more independent, more resilient, more aware of her own strength. Seth had been instrumental in that transformation, not by rescuing her, but by believing in her ability to rescue herself. The next day passed in a blur of activity, as Harriet threw herself into her work to avoid thinking about Seth's imminent departure. Martha Miller watched her with concern but asked no questions, simply assigning her increasingly complex tasks that required complete concentration. Late in the afternoon, the shop bell jingled, and Seth entered, hat in hand. He wore his trail clothes, denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, and the duster coat she remembered from their first meeting. I'm not leaving until morning, he explained, but I wanted to say goodbye properly, not rushed. Martha Miller discreetly disappeared into the back room, leaving them alone among the bolts of fabric and half-finished garments. I've been thinking about what you said, Harriet began, her fingers nervously pleating a scrap of cotton. About your feelings. You don't need to address that, Seth said quickly. I shouldn't have burdened you with it. No, Harriet stopped him. I'm glad you told me. Because the truth is, I've developed feelings for you too. The admission made her breath catch. I didn't want to acknowledge them, it seemed wrong, with Samuel so recently gone. But they're there nonetheless. Hope flared in Seth's eyes. Harriet. But I'm not ready, she continued firmly. I need time. Time to fully grieve Samuel. Time to establish myself here. Time to be certain of what I want. Seth nodded slowly. I understand, and I respect that completely. He stepped closer. May I write to you? I'd be disappointed if you didn't, Harriet smiled, echoing his words from the previous night. And perhaps when you feel ready, you might visit Yellow Creek. It's beautiful country, different from here, green meadows, pine forests in the higher elevations. I'd like that, Harriet said sincerely. Seth reached for her hand, his touch sending warmth through her. I'll be back in Gila Bend on ranch business within 2 months. By then, maybe you'll have more clarity about your feelings. Maybe I will, Harriet agreed softly. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Until then, Mrs. Andrews. The months that followed were a time of growth and healing for Harriet. Her work at the dressmaker's shop flourished, with Martha Miller increasingly trusting her with important clients and complex designs. She made friends in town, the schoolteacher, Miss Collins, the young doctor's wife, Mrs. Fleming, even Sheriff Wilson's daughter Abigail, who helped at her father's office. Seth's letters arrived regularly, filled with stories of Yellow Creek Ranch, descriptions of the mountains and valleys he traversed on Mr. Henderson's business, and carefully worded expressions of his continuing regard. Harriet treasured these letters, reading them multiple times before carefully storing them in a wooden box beneath her bed. In her replies, she shared details of her new life in Gila Bend, the progress of her sewing skills, and gradually, more personal thoughts and memories. With each letter, she found herself opening up more, examining her feelings with growing clarity. Samuel remained in her heart. She visited the small marker the town had placed in the cemetery, even without a body to bury. But her grief had softened from a sharp, constant pain to a gentler ache that allowed room for new emotions. When Seth returned to Gila Bend in August, the town was sweltering under the summer sun. Harriet saw him first from the shop window, riding down the main street on his familiar bay gelding, dust-coating his clothes, but doing nothing to diminish the straight-backed confidence of his bearing. Her heart leapt at the sight of him, confirming what her letters had been gradually revealing. Her feelings for Seth Ryder had deepened despite their separation. He came directly to the shop, removing his hat as he entered, blue eyes immediately finding hers across the room. "Mrs. Andrews," he greeted her formally, though his expression was anything but formal. "Mr. Ryder," she returned, aware of Martha Miller's interested gaze. "Welcome back to Gila Bend." They maintained this polite facade until Martha, with a knowing smile, suggested Harriet might show Seth the new shipment of fabrics that had arrived from Tucson. "These are very fine," Seth said, running his fingers along a bolt of blue cotton once they were relatively alone in the fabric storeroom. "But not nearly as lovely as the woman showing them to me." Harriet blushed. "You shouldn't say such things in Martha's shop. She'll hear you." "Martha Miller has been encouraging me in my pursuit of you since the day we met," Seth chuckled. "I suspect she's contrived this private moment deliberately." "Your pursuit of me?" Harriet raised an eyebrow. "Is that what this is?" Seth's expression grew serious. "If you'll allow it, yes. These past 2 months have only strengthened my feelings, Harriet. Your letters, they've meant everything to me." "And yours to me," she admitted softly. "Then may I court you properly? No more pretense about fabric or business bringing me to town." Harriet considered him thoughtfully. "Samuel has been gone almost 4 months now." "Too soon still?" Seth asked, his voice gentle. "No," Harriet decided, "not too soon. Life is too precious and too uncertain to deny genuine feeling when it arises." She stepped closer to him. "Yes, Seth Ryder, you may court me." The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the desert, sudden and brilliant. "You've made me the happiest man in Arizona territory." That evening, they walked openly together along Gila Bend's main street, nodding to townspeople who watched with varying degrees of surprise and approval. Seth had business at the bank the following day, but promised to remain in town for a week. "Mr. Henderson has given me his blessing to extend my stay if necessary," he explained as they sat on a bench outside the church, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "His blessing?" Harriet questioned. "You told him about me?" Seth looked slightly embarrassed. "I may have mentioned you in my reports, repeatedly. Mr. Henderson eventually demanded to know who this Mrs. Andrews was and why she featured so prominently in my accounts of Gila Bend's business climate." Harriet laughed, the sound carrying on the evening air. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth, that I'd met a remarkable woman who had captured my attention completely." Seth's hand found hers on the bench between them. He was understanding. Said it was about time I showed interest in something besides horses and cattle. As September approached, bringing slightly cooler temperatures and the promise of autumn, Seth's visits to Gila Bend became more frequent. He arranged his business travel to include the town whenever possible, sometimes staying only a day or two, other times lingering for nearly a week. Their courtship proceeded with a mixture of caution and deepening affection. They rode together in the desert, attended town socials, and spent quiet evenings on the small porch behind the dressmaker's shop, talking for hours about their pasts, their beliefs, their hopes. In late September, Seth arrived in Gila Bend with unexpected news. "Mr. Henderson has purchased additional grazing land near Prescott," he explained as they walked along the river path outside town. "He wants me to establish a second operation there, essentially manage my own ranch under the Yellow Creek name." "That's a wonderful opportunity," Harriet said sincerely. "You've certainly earned his trust." "It would mean settling in one place," Seth continued, watching her face carefully. "No more constant travel, a proper home." Harriet's heart quickened at the direction of his thoughts. "That sounds appealing." Seth stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Harriet, I've been thinking about this for weeks. The truth is, I don't want to establish this new ranch alone. He took a deep breath. I want you with me, as my wife. Though she had sensed the proposal coming, the reality of it still took her breath away. Seth, I know it's been only 5 months since Samuel's passing, he rushed on. If you need more time, I understand completely. But I love you, Harriet Andrews. I love your strength and your gentleness, your determination and your compassion. I want to build a life with you. Harriet looked up at him, this man who had literally carried her across troubled waters, who had given her space to heal while never abandoning her, who had shown her that love could come in unexpected forms and times. Yes, she said simply. I will marry you, Seth Ryder. Joy illuminated his features as he pulled her into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, almost hesitant, before deepening into something that spoke of shared longing and future promises. When they parted, Seth rested his forehead against hers. Are you certain? I don't want you to have any regrets. I'm certain, Harriet assured him. Samuel will always have a place in my heart, but he would want me to be happy, to continue living fully. She touched Seth's face tenderly. And you make me happy. They were married 2 weeks later in Gila Bend's small church, with Martha Miller, Sheriff Wilson, and several other townspeople in attendance. Mr. Henderson himself made the journey from Yellow Creek Ranch to stand as Seth's best man, a tall, silver-haired gentleman whose gruff manner couldn't quite hide his pleasure at seeing his trusted employee so happy. You've chosen well, Ryder, he was overheard telling Seth at the small reception afterward. A woman with spirit and sense, exactly what you need. The newlyweds departed the following day for Prescott, where their new life awaited. The journey took them past Dawson's Crossing, now rebuilt with sturdy new planks. Harriet insisted on stopping, standing silently by the river that had taken so much from her, yet, in a strange way, given her a new beginning. Are you all right? Seth asked, his arm around her shoulders. Yes, she said, watching the now calm water flow beneath the bridge, just saying goodbye properly. The ranch near Prescott proved to be everything Seth had described: a sprawling property with excellent grazing land, a modest but comfortable house, and breathtaking views of the mountains. Under their joint management, it flourished, eventually becoming as successful as the main Yellow Creek operation. A year after their marriage, Harriet gave birth to a son they named William, after Seth's father. 2 years later, a daughter followed, whom they called Eliza. As the children grew, so did the ranch, expanding to include orchards and additional grazing lands. Harriet never forgot Samuel or the tragic day at the river crossing, but time transformed her grief into a quiet remembrance that could coexist with her happiness. Sometimes, when crossing streams with her children, she would remember Seth's words on that fateful day, "Then I'll carry you across myself," and marvel at how those simple words had marked the beginning of an unexpected journey. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Seth presented Harriet with a gift, a small carved wooden box containing a silver bracelet. "Open it," he urged as they sat on the porch of their ranch house, the setting sun gilding the distant mountains. Inside the lid, he had burned an inscription: "Every river has its crossing." "It's beautiful," Harriet said, tears welling in her eyes. "And so true." Seth fastened the bracelet around her wrist, then drew her into his embrace. "When I found you by that river all those years ago, I had no idea I was finding my future, my home. And when I lost everything, I couldn't imagine finding such happiness again," Harriet replied, leaning against the strength of his shoulder. "Life takes such unexpected turns." "Like a river," Seth agreed softly. As darkness settled over the ranch and their children slept soundly inside, Harriet and Seth remained on the porch, their hands intertwined, their hearts full with the knowledge that sometimes the most devastating losses can lead to the most precious gains, and that love, like water, always finds its way forward, no matter the obstacles in its path.